So the Sharif study, once again, so you see the procedure up there. We talked about it last time. And what the results showed with this is something that looks like this. Now, so P1, P2, P3, what you see on the right, those represent individual participants. All right. And now this is just a sampling. They did more than 3 people. But look at so on the y-axis here, this is the number of inches they thought that the dot moved. And what you see here is that when they're alone, look how discrepant they are. All right, so this is when the participants did it alone, and you can see how far apart they are. And it's natural for them to be this far apart. And the reason why is because, once again, there's no correct answer, and your eyes are playing tricks on you. So it's natural for some people to say, oh, it only moved 1 inch or 2 inches, or in the case of the person in the green bar, 7.5 inches. Like, this is normal. But then I want you to look at these trials right here. So these trials are, remember when they did it in groups, and they took turns about who went first. And they did this study again, and they did the judgments out loud. And what's going to happen is look how much they start to converge. Look especially at, let's take this green guy here. Look how discrepant he was, or look how much difference there was just because of the power of the group. And then in the next trial, they get even closer. And then by the third trial, they're all saying the same answer. All right. Now, what's cool about this is this is going to be this piece right here where they all come together. And what's really neat about that is what we have is a situation that's ambiguous. And so you got to assume that these participants are. So let's take this green participant. First, he said 7.5. Then, okay, the next trial. Let's say the red bar person goes first, and they say 2 inches. Then the blue bar person goes almost 3 inches. And then the green bar, he's like, oh, but a second ago I just said 7.5. So 4 inches? Like, you got to imagine that this person's like, is there something that they know that I don't? Did I blink? Did I do something wrong? And that's how this piece works, so that they all converge at the end. Now, what's cool about this is we have informational social influence because because what we have is we have the idea that the situation is ambiguous, right? And that other people's answers shaped your own. And we know this because, you take this P1, that's going to be the green bar guy. You take that guy, and when they were alone, they weren't anywhere near each other's answers. But when they're in a group, all of a sudden they are. And remember, and I keep saying this because this is the key, and we'll get to that in a second, is that the situation is ambiguous. Remember, there really is no movement. There's no correct answer except for 0, but no one says that. All right, everyone gets kind of preyed upon for this illusion. And so what's going to happen is, because of that, the situation's ambiguous. Now, here's what we know, is that informational social influence, when it's done, it leads to private acceptance. And remember, acceptance is the idea that once it's all done, you actually believe it, right? And you conform to others because you believe that they are genuinely correct, all right? So how do we know this, right? How do we know this? So the alternative to acceptance, right, is is compliance, and that's the idea that how do we know that the people in the Sharif study, how do we know that they were just going along with the group, but secretly inside they disagreed? This would be like that green bar guy. In the group, he's like, oh, 3 inches, sure, but I really thought it was 7. Like, I'm just saying it to go with the group. Like, how do we know that? Well, the Sharif, what he did is he did a follow-up study, and he did the same thing, except for at the very end. So he did it alone, and then they came back in groups, and then what he did is he did one extra trial, where what he did in this extra trial was he went ahead and asked participants alone, again, to do it. And what he found is that even when they were alone at the end, they still said what the group said. So in this case, if these people did it alone, all right, so they'd be like, it looked like alone. Or if we're going to extend this graph to look alone, everyone would be like this. Right, it would look just like that. Everyone said the exact same thing again. And we know, and so you got to imagine that if it wasn't acceptance, then they would all go back to their original judgments. But that's not what happened. They still went with what they said here. All right. And that's really cool to me, how that works. All right. So the real world, so informational social influence happens a lot in the real world. Okay. So for example, energy conservation. All right. So there's no right answer here. So, in terms of how much energy you conserve, because everyone's house has to use some energy. And so how much you save or don't save, there's no right answer. So it's ambiguous. And I think that's the key you guys have to get from this, is that when you're practicing with these things, if I were to present, let's say, a scenario for you on the third exam, you have to identify, is it ambiguous or not? And in energy conservation, it is. And so when they're told that, oh, your neighbors conserve energy, you should too, there's no right or wrong answer. So we're going to assume that our neighbors are correct or right, and then we may change ours as well. All right. Another example is, I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's in hotels where there's like a little tag that hangs from the bathroom that says, like, oh, if you reuse your towels, then we won't wash them, and not washing them saves energy and it saves the environment, stuff like that. And then there's always a thing under there that and so that says like X% of people do this. And I'm hoping you guys have seen those things in hotels and stuff like that. And the idea here is that, once again, we're relying on others for the right answer when it's ambiguous, when the situation is ambiguous, like it is here. All right. So when does this work? Boom, there we go. I made it formal. When the situation's ambiguous. And what's going to happen is, and this is the most important variable, there are others as we'll talk about, but what's going to happen here once again is, if the situation is ambiguous, we think other people know something we don't. And that's what makes them right. All right. Your book talks about something like the situation's in crisis. And I don't like the word crisis. Really what they're saying is that when the situation's important to you and the right answer is important, when that happens and the right answer is important to you, then we're going to look for others for the right answer, because we're going to assume that they know something we don't. And obviously then, if others are experts, that's going to help with this process. All right. And then finally, the need to be accurate. So of the three needs we talked about beforehand, when you want to be right and accurate, obviously informational is going to kick in. But remember, the most important one is when the situation is ambiguous. But all four of these are important. All right. So let's talk about a really cool study. The way this is going to work is, we're actually going to break this study up into two parts. This tested informational social influence, and the next piece of this, which is called normative social influence. So this one study tested both. So we're going to talk about the first half of the study by Barron and his colleagues. All right, so participants, what they were supposed to do was engage in an eyewitness identification task. An eyewitness identification task, what happens there is they see a video of someone committing a crime. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a lineup. So there's going to be, a lineup looks like, a sheet of paper like this. And then you see six, let's say six, it could be more, faces. And so these are faces, right? And what you have to do, they're probably not all smiling in their mugshots, but whatever. And what you have to do is, you have to say, of the six faces, who committed the crime. So that's what an eyewitness identification task is. Okay? You have to say who committed the crime that you just witnessed. All right, so once again, they witnessed the crime. Now, what made this informational is, remember, to make it informational, you have to make the situation ambiguous. And so what these researchers did, and this is what's really neat, is they presented these faces, but each face was only shown for half a second. All right, that is hard to do. In other words, the six faces were shown really fast, and then you had to pick who it was. All right, so that in itself made the situation ambiguous. Is right here. This is kind of one of the key manipulations here, are for half a second. Now, then what they did is, to be like this, you have to have pressure. And so they had to identify the perpetrator in groups of people. And these groups of people were the one participant and then several Confederates. All right. Now, the first so one of the manipulations they did was they manipulated accuracy. Now, they used the term accuracy in their paper, but really this is importance. So you had two levels. And remember, on the previous slide, we said when the situation is important, or in crisis, as your book calls it, then this should really kick in. So what you have here is you have two conditions, or one independent variable, accuracy. You know, I'm just going to get rid of this because I don't like that term. We're going to put importance. All right. And what they did is participants were in the high or the low condition. In the low condition, this is the easiest one. In the low condition here, they were told that this is the first time this technique has ever been done. It's like you're beta testing it, so we'll see how it goes. There's no real pressure. It's not really important. Stuff like that. Okay. And then for the high condition, what they were told is that not only will you get $20 for doing this right, but in addition, not right now, but in addition to get $20, this technique is going to be used by the police departments and courts all over the country. So therefore, it's going to be very important you get this right. All right. Now, what's going to happen is they're going to do this multiple times. And what's going to happen is on the critical trials, the Confederate is going to start to get the answer wrong. All right, they're going to start to get the answer wrong. And then the question is, does the participant follow suit? And here's what they found. So on the y-axis here, we have the percent of participants who conformed on these critical trials. And remember, on the critical trials, the Confederate started getting the answer wrong kind of on purpose. Now, I'm never going to test you on these numbers here, but these are the percentages. What you guys need to know for this is just trends. And what they found is that when the importance was really high, so this is the condition where they're told you get $20 and it's used by police departments, what they found is just over 50% of people conformed. However, when it was low importance, so it was like a beta test, only 35% of people conformed. And what this suggests to us, wrong button. What this suggests to us is that what's happening is that when it's really important and the situation is ambiguous, those two factors combined, then what you're going to get is you're going to get a case where you want to be right. The need for accuracy is important. You want to be right. And you look for others for the right answer. It's ambiguous because of this half a second deal right here. It's ambiguous. And the Confederates are getting the answers wrong. And you got to assume, like, as a participant, you got to say to yourself, oh, they must know something I don't. It's super important I get this right because the police people are going to use it, the courts are going to use it, and I get $20 for doing it right. I'm just going to go with what they say. And that's where 51% conformed. In the low condition, where you're told, oh, this is just a practice trial, even though it's ambiguous, you're like, oh, it's not important. So when the Confederate starts to get the answer wrong, and you don't know if it's the wrong answer or not, you're going to sit there and be like, well, I'm just going to go with what I think because, the situation isn't that important, even though there's pressure and even though it's ambiguous. It's ambiguous, it's all good. I'm just going to go with my gut, and that's why you see less conformity there.